Good evening, everybody. This is Sarul from People First, a 27-year company specializing in talent hiring, coaching, integral education, well-being, etc. Here's our attempt to share every week for 30 minutes some of our experience that we have developed over the years. So today is part two, limitations. You need not have listened to the earlier one. They both stand independent, but there is a linkage too. So last Tuesday, when I finished the session, I closed the laptop and I felt a bit incomplete. I said, "We have explored limitation, but why I'm not getting the satisfying feeling?" And then I went and had my, I don't know, maybe dinner or whatever. And then it dawned on me that there is another component of limitations that I had not explored. Last week, what we spoke about are limitations within oneself and how do we work on it. And the second aspect we explored was, as a coach, how do you help others to work with their limitation, especially when they are extraordinarily sensitive about it. So this is what we explored. But then I flipped the coin and then I said, okay, so our limitations is fine. When we come across an experience where we feel we are encountering the limitations of others, what do we do? So then is when we put this part two, and then a couple of people who hear this series regularly, they also said that they also had the same thought, and I had voiced it as a flyer for part two. So this is what we're going to explore. Having said that, it's a slightly tricky topic. Who am I to even judge somebody as you're having a limitation or not? Okay, is a ethical moral question that comes. But at the same time, we're all, most of us, in a work context, and there are common goals to accomplish. There are common templates, either formally or informally articulated, which say that these are best practices and all that stuff. Somebody is able to do well, somebody falls short of it. Somebody brings a certain attitude which is looked up upon, somebody is not able to. So there is this whole phenomenon of so anything shows up against a referral point. So if there is a code of best practices, both as a culture or as skills, then against that, when we look at somebody with whom we are working or living our life, then their behavior or attitude or skill can certainly show up as a limitation. That's point number one. Point number two, we also need to keep in mind that somebody's limitation could be another person's strength. So for example, there was a time when you all know that I run a recruitment firm, and at the same time, I also work with people in the education field. I also work with people in certain communities, where they explore a certain kind of living. So there was a particular time when I was managing all these different buckets, and I was interacting with people from a certain community where my strength was looked upon as a limitation in their experience. Like, so for example, I in recruitment, we need to be highly driven, we need to be resilient, we need to be slightly fast, because of various reasons of the nature of our work. But when I started interacting with a few members of the community, they found me too fast, too quick, too demanding, too intense. So what was a strength in a particular context, in a completely different context, becomes a limitation. So it's true, you would have seen it. A strength at work becomes suddenly a limitation with a spouse, as a parent, as a father, as a mother. So there is an objective phenomenon to what we refer as a limitation of the other. There is also a subjective phenomenon of how it is felt as, kind of a thing. But nevertheless, whether it is subjective or objective, the exploration that we're going to make today is, when I am interacting with somebody and I come across what I experience or perceive or understand or even judge, in that for that matter, that this is a limitation of somebody. Okay, now first we will look at what is the difference between an observation and a judgment. And I'm not going into the theoretical definition, but more at a simple experiential way. When I experience, for example, two of us need to work together in a project, and let us say there has been a change of leadership. The leadership has changed. So person A, person B. Now, let us say person B was very fond with the earlier leader who was with the organization for 20 years, almost like a founder, built the organization, but then moved on or retired or whatever. And then the successor came, not groomed from within the organization, but from a different market, very successful from, let us say, a similar organization or allied organization. And the person comes in with a very different bent of mind. Success, both carried success, but the way they do things are enormously very different in that sense of it. So this person comes in, and now B starts finding it very difficult. This person is far more pushy, far more demanding than what B has experienced from the earlier boss. If you take this as a context, for example, then suddenly B finds oneself in a slightly difficult position. Okay. And that is merely an experience. Judgment is when we make certain labels, like this person is like that person is like that, which are just certain mental commentary and ways that maybe people would speak in the lunch table or the coffee table or stuff like that. So let's drop. So judgment is problematic because it creates a certain imprint into the mind and then rotates. But then if four people talk about it, 10 people talk about it, it starts generating what is called the air of a gossip. And then it becomes extraordinarily strong in the organization. Like if we are talking about the limitation of a boss, for example, an experience is fine. The entire today we're going to explore about how do you deal with an experience of limitation of the other. That's what we're going to explore. But when you move it into a judgment or when you move it into a gossip conversation, it becomes largely problematic because it kind of creates a air that exists without an owner. After a while, what happens is somewhere in the atmosphere of the organization or the culture, there is a certain felt sense that the new person is like this, even though he or she may have carry certain traits but not the rest. This by itself will generate a certain existence that is problematic. To dissolve it sometimes takes months and years. Okay, so that's an error. I'm not moving into that right now. So the entire rest of the 20 minutes that we would have, let's just go into simple ways, things that I've understood from my experience. And I'm not claiming to be the expert on this. I myself make my own struggles and learnings in the process. So when I am working with somebody, it could be a colleague, it could be a team member, it could be a boss, it could be a vendor, it could be a customer, etc. When I'm encountering a limitation experientially, how do I deal with it? So here I'm going to present a few scenarios. The first scenario is when I get hit by it. Okay, I get hit by it. Very simple. So let's say somebody is aggressive. There's nothing wrong in aggression because I do know that in certain fields or certain works, it is part and parcel of the job. They are trained and they need to be like that to be called successful and to be successful. So there are certain professions and certain fields of work where it is demanded. Okay. But let us say somebody is, you know, negatively, maybe critiquing too much, or caustic, or sarcastic, or whatsoever. And otherwise, the person is really good, performing very well together, very skilled. But somewhere this attitude or behavior is coming and it hits you. This is the first scenario. The first scenario is when a limitation of another human being is hitting you. Then what happens? I'm going to react. So, depending on my nature, I may withdraw, or I may fight, or I may backbite, or I may complain. These are all mechanisms that I've built, and it's not necessarily a function of my age or function of my experience. Depending on my upbringing or the way that I've largely dealt with in family and work, I'm going to come like that and I'm going to react with the other person. Okay. This is largely problematic. It's problematic because first, we are not conscious. Two, we're not bringing the element of choice and modifying something when it is coming in out. Why we allowing it to come out? Why can't we modify, or why can't we do alchemy? So when when something hits you from the limitation of the other, and you don't have control over it. You don't have control. By control, I don't mean suppression. Suppression is a problem. We all know it will hit back. But when we do not have the capacity of modulation of alchemy, then I'm going to have some kind of a reaction, which often will be counterproductive. So this is the first scenario, which is not so helpful. In the second scenario, it hits me. Okay, it hits me, but I am recovering. Okay, I'm recovering as quickly as possible, as best as possible. Sometimes, it may take a couple of hours. Sometimes it may take a couple of days. But over a period of time, I ensure that, first of all, I'm aware that I'm taking a hit. Many a time, people are not aware when there is a experience that is going on in the family or work. They just take it. They allow the impact to come at an emotional level, at a sensorial level, at a mind level, and then they later on they go home and they brood over it. Maybe they hit the booze or something of that sort. To That's not so helpful. So that's again a reaction. So in the second scenario, I'm taking a hit. Okay, unfortunately or fortunately, I'm taking a hit, but I'm working within myself. I am doing my best to come out of that and bounce back into a neutrality, into a poise that I'm able to go back in and work. Okay. Now, this is in my, so if I look at my own growing up and in the corporate, in my own organization, as a trainer, as a family member, okay, as a friend, I've seen that there's a hit and there's a reaction. The second step is that there is a hit, but I'm already starting the modulation process. I'm already starting alchemy, but I'm not necessarily suppressing, which will lead to trouble. Okay, so here there are many options. As I'm modifying, I can even go and tell the other person in a, so instead of reacting, I can go and say, hey, look, this what you're doing is a little bit difficult to me. I can say it in a nice manner. If the person is not listening, I can be a little bit more firm, assertive, etc. There are many different ways. But to do that is the first act of self modulation, self mastery, self alchemy, which is the very first step, that I'm taking responsibility for the churn that occurs inside me, and I'm working on it, working on it, working on it. Now, here again, it's not as plain as simple as what I'm saying. It's not one, two, it's not like that. Even when you're working, those that are not transformed will spill out as a harsh word, and you will wonder why the heck the word came out. You didn't want it to come, but it comes. So in the second scenario also, whatever is unprocessed is going to go back to the earlier format. It moves as a reaction, either externally or internally. You kind of brood back or do something. Or most of the formulas that people use is, there's a kind of a limiting reaction in one, maybe family or work. You then give unto somebody else and you kind of balance the equation. So the second scenario is, I am taking the hit, but I'm taking responsibility to work at it. This is normally the second poise. Most stop here. Most do not take the trouble of going to the third poise, which in my understanding is, why take the hit? And this is what I'm going to largely explore right now. Why take the hit? Why allow that limiting perception, for example, to enter into your head? You need to see it, but why allow it to enter you? You see a certain, reaction or emotion that is coming in. You can observe, you can act appropriately, but why allow it to hit you? Now that is the third poise, which hardly people take the time and effort on that. Because most of the people think that, life and work is about doing some job, getting paid, learning more, maybe getting promoted, but they do not spend the time on, let's say, the self mastery, or even people management. As people first, we have been doing enormous work on training people on managing people. I remember doing this even in the first or second or third year of starting the organization. And today we were speaking that we will offer far more services around that. So we will do that. But coming back to this, hardly people take the time of self mastery, which means that it's not a buffalo skin, as they loosely say colloquially. It's not that I am developing a buffalo skin and things don't affect me. We're not talking about numbness. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a very responsible, even a sensitive human who is able to operate in the thick of activity, of difficult situations, either at work or at home, but is in a poise where things don't affect him or her. For this, the precondition is that I am anchored somewhere. There is an anchor that I am holding, which is like, so for example, there's a heavy wind blowing from multiple different directions. Okay, this is life sometimes. But if I do not have an anchor, I'm going to be thrown, left, right, and center. I'm going to be tossed. But if I hold on to an anchor, then somewhat I will recalibrate around it and I'll be able to navigate in life. So when somebody is enormously anchored, then is when we move to the third point, that we are able to face the limitations of others, but we don't take it in. First of all, by the way, my personal opinion is that I will say it in two ways. Everybody has the right, in one sense, to be themselves, which will include both their strengths and limitations. But when it comes into work context or even family context, where we are informally agreeing, to support each other. It's not just the transactional living of, let's say I somebody earns, somebody cooks, somebody does this or interchange. Now men and women interchange these roles. It's not that alone. It's like we come together to support each other in that sense of it. So even in such situations, the point is that when we really talk about self mastery, the real point becomes that irrespective of all that, I'm able to flow through all that, but I am anchored differently. I'm not numb to what is going on. Okay. So in this, and then I'll come to a fourth poise, which is slightly higher, extension of the third poise. So when we come to the third poise, I'll give you some very practical examples. Somebody is anchored so much on their breath, okay, breath, that when a jolt is coming, they hold on to the breath and it's almost like they're flipping, but they don't flip, kind of thing. Or when we come to even the second and the third, or from a very practical context of the workplace, sometimes we need to challenge people. If we accept the limitation just like that in a work context or even in a family context, let's say between two parents, then we may not give the best product or service, or we may not give the best experience for the children, for example. So sometimes we need to challenge the other, and in lovingly or firmly uh, push them, inspire them, or empower them to move into a different voice. It's extraordinarily important, and it's in fact the role of a team leader also, or team leader and upwards also in that sense of it. So between a 2 and a 3, where I'm bouncing back, and the 3 when I'm not even allowing it to hit, first is I'm holding to an anchor, which could be a faith, it could be the vision of the product or service, it could be the connection of the organization, it could be a connection to the service that we want to render. I'm so anchored on it that I'm not losing, into anything that is coming by. So then becomes the opportunity for us to truly contribute without judgment. Watch out, without judgment. Because when you do judgment, somewhere it'll come out. It'll come out as if you are higher, or you forget your own limitations, you forget your own humility, which are very important traits for a human being. So without moving into all that, you actually, in a way, lovingly confront the other person and say that, hey, why not this? Why operate from this limiting frame? Go learn the skill. Why are you upset? Oh yeah, your life is really bad. So such a thing has happened. Well, I empathize, I'm with you, but why not learn to come out of it? So you kind of start challenging the people, even your own bosses, even your spouses. Okay, it's not that easy because they're going to come back and say that, hey, who are you to say this? You are like this, you're like that. So that comes the authentic path. So the more you are following the path too, which is like taking self responsibility for what's going on inside you and resetting back to yourself to normal, the more and more you genuinely attempt, results will come on its own. The more and more you genuinely attempt, there is a rightful, authentic space that you get if you don't move into judgment. If you just keep it experiential, then you explain the vision of the project, you explain the vision of the role, you explain, you go into you go intimately ask the product or the service and say, this is what the product is, this is what it is trying to do in the world, and we are instruments of that. So why are we bringing this, why can't we bring that legitimate stan, or opportunity comes to us when we have practiced the two, and then we are moving to three, where the others limiting thoughts, emotions is not entering you. And for that, you have to be in some kind of a practice or an anchor over a period of time. Other anchors are faith in God, faith in the divine, or faith in the goodness of humanity, or even humility. It's like, yeah, okay, so this is the human existence, but we don't have to necessarily live life like that. So with that comes the third step. I don't take it in, but and at the same time, I'm able to lovingly challenge, lovingly request, lovingly ask you, my boss, you, my family member, you, my teammate, to shift to ways of working or being which are far more nourishing. The same is true between spouses, because if we slip up, the children are going to have an ambience which they're going to carry through lifetime. So this is the step number 3. Very difficult, takes enormous amount of time, and the two saviors for us on this, or rather three saviors, is no judgment, patience, and humility. Okay. The fourth is slightly subtle, and many don't, most don't even come there, is shifting from a very personal way of responding to the reactions or the limitations of others, to deal with it in a more impersonal way. Now I may risk you misunderstanding me by that word. Impersonal does not mean non-involvement. Impersonal has a very high involvement, but I'm not personal about things. I'm not responding as an Arul. I'm not responding as an individual with his or her quirks and preferences. I'm moving more and more impersonal, which means that the identification, what I brought it into 3, is moving into a maturity. I'm identifying more and more. I become the product, I become the service, I become the industry, I become the organization, I become the profession. If I'm in coaching, I become the profession. I'm not a coach, but I'm embodying the whole profession inside me. Now, because I am now embodying that, I slowly become more and more, from a personal, I become impersonal. From one way, I become multiple ways. I become more universal. And then the humility actually goes up, strength actually goes up, clarity actually goes up. These are the side benefits, or the benefits that you get by going impersonal. So which means you're not entangled, you're not even entangled with your own intelligence or your own, like it is not affecting me kind of thing. You go even beyond that, and you're purely now becoming an instrument, but an alert instrument, not a numb instrument, uh, a very alert instrument. And that is actually what has often been referred as a flow state, which is extraordinarily rare. But when we taste it, all the challenges seem like pittance. It's worth the whole thing when you experience flow. Flow comes when we are impersonal, when we are, it is actually so the term collaboration, which is often used, they say balance the limitations with the strengths of another. In a way, what I've also shared is a way of collaboration. But the true collaboration comes when we are able to interact with each other in an impersonal way, but connected way. I'm connected to you as an individual. I'm also connected to the product. I'm also connected to the service. And connected to that impersonal means I do the right thing, not as Arul will do it, but as what the product would demand me to do. I would do the right thing in the organization if there is a errors seeping in, not as what Arul will do, or not even with Arul's skill. I will step up as the organization. I will step up as the product. I will step up as my profession. And whatever is the bridging I need to do internally, I will do it. And I will act truly out of the best ways. Best ways. But in this, there will be no, arrogance and judgments. It will all come down because we understand that life is complex. Life is complex. People have the freedom, to be this way and that way and flow up and down. But yet we have we have a work to do. We have a job to do. We have a cause or we have a goal to accomplish, depending on the different flavors. And I am impersonally pursuing the path is when we start experiencing mastery at work. We start experience the people feel very comfortable with us because they will not necessarily need to hide their limitations, but in the earlier they will camouflage their limitations or hide it even, and if we see it there'll be a little knot around it. In this case they are very fluid, they are open, because we are not there to criticize them, to attack them, etc. We are there to flow, but yet we are challenging each other, we are positively pulling up each other, and we are really focused on the flow or the work or the product or the service. In this case is when truly we will start experiencing the phenomenon that the limitation also can be a ladder. A limitation need not always be a block. We have seen in some movies also. I think Lagan is one of the movies that really portrayed it also. You can also see that you can use a limitation in an interesting way, in a creative way, and yet not be stuck by it, because the step 4 or the stage 4, and this flows, in different ways, is that I'm not stuck, I'm flowing. So I use a limitation to move forward, and yet I evolve the limitation. Now, the moment you are impersonal, whether it is your limitation or the other's limitation, you treat equally. It's just that, I will come with both the approaches. The limitations at the service of the product, how to leverage it to make a contribution, and yet I will not stop there. If I stop there, I'll get stuck. I'll also work on transforming the limitation, either mine or yours. It's still the same. We need to transform it as a collective so that we can build a better family, build a better society, build a better workplace. This is as far as I've understood, and I shared it experientially, and also in a way that perhaps it triggers you to through some reflections or contemplation. So thank you so much. And if there's any query on this, you can put it on chat or message me, in LinkedIn or other ways. Thank you so much, and bye bye.